welcome to the 10th episode of the Delora Dabbles podcast. I would apologize for the mess, but I'm a clutter monkey, and I feel like that's something that you guys need to know, and not sure it'll ever stop. I'm a clutter monkey. So, as you can see, I am spinning on the quill. I'm spinning some cotton on the quill of the Cassandra. I've kind of got it figured out. My test, because this is obviously not the first time I've been spinning on here. My yarn is not very consistent. I have to get used to this new mode, and this is what I will predominantly be talking about. But before I get into all of that, I have some things to share with you guys about the Cassandra wheel. Again, the more I use this wheel, the more I figure things out. Now, I will say, because I've got this right here. Oh, sorry, Brad. I just scared the bejesus out of him. I don't know how this got tangled up around here. This is what happens when you leave shit on the floor. You get random fiber tangled around it. Anyway, this is my original drive band from the Cassandra. I cut this and molded it shorter because it was skidding on the 6-to-1. And that was back when I thought the 6-to-1 was the 12-to-1. Yes. So it was skidding on the 6-to-1, so I tightened it just a little bit. But now, when I put this drive band on my larger whirls, which is my 10-to-1 and my 12-to-1, it rattles my Cassandra. But it fits my 6-to-1 and my 8-to-1 ratios perfectly. Now, because this is the Cassandra, you don't need an official drive band. This is like an actual spinning wheel drive band. For the Cassandra, you can use, and this is what John Sherman used to use before he moved to the drive bands, was you can use .120 window screen spline retainer, something like that. So this is a hollow tube. This is the drive band I have right now. It's black, as I think you guys can see. It's hollow, which makes it a bitch to splice and plastic weld together. But it's working right now. Next time, I'm not sure when I'm going to have money to actually buy more of this stuff. But Paradise Fibers does sell this I think they sell it by the yard. So I'm going to buy quite a few yards of this later on. But for right now, it's a $3, $2 pack of window spline retainer. I've been playing around with my ratio since this is cheap. I've been playing around with if it's too tight, if it's too loose, if it's just barely snugged up to it. What I have found is that you definitely want a separate drive band for the 10-to-1 and 12-to-1 ratios, and then a separate drive band for the 6-to-1 and the 8-to-1, because the whirl sizes are very different. And if you have a drive band that fits the 6-to-1 and you wrap it around that 12-to-1, this little baby's going to rattle. She's got just the slightest little bit of give here, and this is the quill, so there's no flyer on it. But it'll make the flyer it'll knock funny. I'm not exactly sure what is knocking, but the whole system will just knock funny if that drive band is too tight. So if you find that your Cassandra is very, very loud and you have tightened the drive band yourself, that might be why. So anyway, on to the next thing about the Cassandra. I put additional little hooks here in between the big hooks. Now, what does that do? Well, I'm going to show you what that does right here. This is from a current project that I'll be talking about more after I talk about the spindle wheel, because I don't want to bog people down who are here for the spindle wheel with everything else. These were all wrapped before I put the hook on. I'm not sure if you can see those really deep valleys and the really tall hills on my bobbins. These right here, they were wrapped after, these were both spun after I put in the tiny hooks. And look, this is the same amount of yarn across this whole thing. Each one of these is roughly 25 grams of fiber. These bobbins look more full. I'm not able to pack on as much onto these bobbins because they are unevenly packed on. These are very evenly packed on. As you can see, I could pack on so much more onto these bobbins by wrapping them better. So that's what I did. And whenever I do start spinning something bulkier, which I don't see myself doing anytime soon, it's really just as simple as unscrewing the little tiny hooks off of this. It's just that simple. I will say that it has not affected my tension at all. I am actually able to spin lace weights better because used to whenever I was spinning 45 WPI singles, I was having to wrap them around some of these other hooks and then back onto this side. So it would go over here, and then it would go over here, and then it would go over here. And then it would feed onto the bobbin. I don't have to do that now because for some reason having the smaller little hooks and having it wind through some bigger hooks and some smaller hooks, I haven't had that problem yet. Now, this is for the hawser ply, and I'll talk about it more later. So the first thing you need to know about using the quill attachment on your bobbin is you need to wipe your quill down with some rubbing alcohol. That's why this is out, because I've been playing with this little baby all morning. And yeah, you definitely don't want your stuff to slip off. You've always, like, I've got Vaseline and oil on here all the time. Now, whenever I go back to spinning on the flyer and bobbin, then I'm going to need to re-grease this. But whenever you're on the quill, you need to ungrease it. So, one thing that I will say about using the quill is that it is a learning curve if you're used to a charkha. Because for one, this is so much thicker. My stuff was winding on way faster than I thought it would. But you also, whenever you start and stop spinning, and on my charkha you might have seen me do this a little bit, where I pull it out a little before I start actually spinning again. What I'm doing is I am untwist locking the fibers in my drafting triangle. I'm sure if you've read any books on spinning, you know what a drafting triangle is. It's this area here. Mine don't quite look like a triangle. But you've got your yarn, you've got this part, and then it starts to go up. So you want to untwist lock that drafting triangle before you start trying to long draw, so that you can actually long draw properly. Now, depending on where my pedals are, I might have to give my wheel a start or not, but depending on where they are right now, I have to give it a little start. And here we're long drawing like usual. And I am on the 12-to-1 ratio. I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to keep putting twist in. Let's test this. Yeah, I've still got a lot of give in this yarn. And this yarn is actually fairly consistent. I'm very proud of myself for that. First try. And you're going to have to sit here and do this to set the twist in for quite a little while. Because it's not like a charkha, I'm on a 12-to-1 also. And whenever you treadle, it really only goes so fast. So that's a good twist amount. Now, usually on my charkha, I unwind, I go backwards, and then I wind on forwards. All I do is I pull here until I meet in the middle of where I should be. You don't need to pedal backwards on a charkha or a spindle wheel. It's just on my charkha from where I'm sitting, it's easier to spin backwards to get my yarn off of here and back onto here. But on a spindle wheel, you're already sitting right in front of the spindle. It's nothing to just pull out like this and then wind on. I like to wind on very slowly because, as you can see, it winds on fast. So we're going to untwist lock these fibers again. They weren't twist locked too bad, so alright, there we go. And we're going to start pedaling, and we're going to start long drawing. Alright, now I have some slubs to actually show you guys some stuff with. And we're going to stop here. Okay. I'm just going to give this a little bit of help. If you saw the 9th episode of the podcast, you will recognize what I'm doing. I am evening out my slubs, and as I said in that podcast, you will feel the yarn give while you are pulling, and it is the scariest thing in the world. The thing about the spindle wheel that makes it different from the charkha, ooh, and I made too large of a make with all these slubs. But the thing that is different about the spindle wheel than the charkha is that the whole time I'm pulling this out, I can be spinning because it's not going so fast that I have to start and stop spinning like you saw in the 9th episode. I can just spin as I'm pulling on here. Now let me check. Alright, I like the sprawling of this. Again, I'm just going to pull like this until I'm on where I plan on doing this. Now, I do tend on my spindle wheel and my charkha to pack in the middle of the spindle, and the Cassandra does have a very long spindle for this. But I will say, because whenever I talked to John Sherman on the phone last week, I talked about this. My charkha does not have like a, what do they call it? Like it's a back protector. It basically keeps, ooh, excuse me, that was a weird hiccup. It basically keeps your yarn from getting tangled into your mechanisms back here. My charkha doesn't have one, so I'm used to having to store all of my yarn right in the middle here. I'm used to that. However, John Sherman suggested that I just take a piece of cardboard or cardstock or something and just pop it on here and put it back here. So that your yarn, if it gets back here, it doesn't get caught in those mechanisms. So do be aware of that if you want to use the quill attachment on the Cassandra, or if you are using a charkha or a spindle wheel of any kind and it doesn't have one of those. A lot of times they're made out of metal, especially on your book charkhas, but you're fine using cardboard. And I feel like if you've got a really long spindle on something, it's optional. As you can see, I don't have any piece of cardboard here. I'm keeping my yarn in the middle of my spindle. I will show you guys one more demonstration on here. And again, I am on the 12-to-1 ratio. And I do feel like this would be more efficient on my charkha. However, and I'm going to stop here so that I don't run into that problem again where I made too large of a make. And we're pulling, we're evening out some of these slubs. Now I can feel I'm in the danger zone. I need to start putting in more twist. When you are, I don't really know how to describe what the danger zone feels like to someone who's maybe a less experienced spinner, but when you are pulling this, and see how smooth that is? Damn, I'm good. Anyway, whenever you are spinning and whenever you are pulling against this, well, actually I need a little bit more slack than that. Anyway, whenever you are pulling on a traditional long draw and you are kind of redrafting something out, as you are pulling what you've just spun, and actually let me give y'all a video demonstration. Exactly. I need to untwist lock these fibers again. And here we go. Wait. That was a false start. Okay, there we go. And we're going to stop here. As you can see, I've got a little slub, kind of a longer slub. Not a whole lot of really intense slubbing going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist. I can feel the twist lock throughout this yarn. And twist lock is just when the fibers have been twisted and they're kind of locked together. Now you want to completely twist lock your yarn or your cotton before you put it on here, right? This is not completely twist locked because I can pull the fibers out of the lock, out of the twist lock. And as I'm pulling, it's like I'm pulling just a little bit right now. I can feel a little bit of tension. As you first start pulling, you feel the yarn wanting to fight you a little bit. It gives a little bit of a fight. Now remember, these are very, very minute feelings in your fingers. It's not fighting you. You're not having to tug. But as you start to tug, it's not wanting to give it up. As you tug more, it wants to give more and more and more. And if you just keep pulling without putting in more twists, it's going to fall apart on you. So at this point, I'm in the danger zone. As I am pulling, I am not feeling like the yarn itself is giving me an adequate fight as I'm pulling it. So I need to put in more twist. Now, because we are on the 12-to-1 ratio on a Cassandra, I am pulling right now. My wheel is spinning, but I am still pulling. And it's a little bit harder to do it like this and to feel the minutia of what you're doing. So I have to stop. Because this is bouncing. Like this yarn right here is bouncing off the tip. Every time you spin, this yarn it's bounce, 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 bounce off the tip, which you feel in your fingers, which can affect whether or not you're feeling your yarn giving you a fight, putting up a fight or not. So be aware of that. But as long as you're inserting twist as you are slowly pulling, you shouldn't have a disaster. I actually really like the way this yarn looks. I'm going to put in more twist. And again, unlike a charkha, I'm having to do this for a longer period of time. There is also no tensioning mechanism on this bobbin. So it's, because on this quill I should say, because there's no bobbin right now obviously. There is no tensioning mechanism. Because there is no tensioning mechanism, when I spin this wheel, I'm not getting any fight off of my pedals. Whenever I have my bobbin and my flyer on here, and I have my tension on, there's just something different about the way the whole machine feels in my feet when I'm spinning. Right? It's kind of like the feelings you get in your fingers, except that you can't go as fast, is what I'm trying to say. If you don't have tension on this quill, everything is running so smoothly and so quickly and so finely that there's no resistance being put on the machine to the point that the machine, like, there's no, how do I say this? Let me start pedaling. It's very hard to try to pedal faster because my feet are not, there's no resistance on the pedals because there's no tensioning band on a bobbin. There's nothing hanging on it. There's no weight on here. So it feels like, compared to pedaling when I have my flyer and my bobbin on, I feel like I'm pedaling a pedal car. Yeah, I feel like I'm pedaling a pedal car. Like let's compare this to bicycles and stuff. If you were going uphill on a bicycle, you have some resistance. You're pushing and pushing and pushing, right? Like you've got more push feeling going on. When you're going downhill, it feels like you're pedaling and you're not doing anything because the machine's already in motion and the machine's already going, and your pedaling is just inconsequential feeling. That's kind of what it is like to spin on the quill versus the bobbin and flyer. Bobbin and flyer wheel, it feels like you're pedaling uphill. With the quill, you're pedaling downhill. There's not a lot of resistance. So as you see now, I'm pulling on here. You can see some of my slubs kind of giving. I'm in the danger zone. I just entered the danger zone where my yarn is not giving me a lot of give anymore. I mean, where it's giving me too much give and not enough fight. So here I am, I'm pulling as I'm pedaling. Oh, shoot. We done had an accident. That will happen. Usually whenever this happens, joining cotton to cotton is a pain in the ass. Let me just tell you straight up, it's a pain in the ass. You are really going to need to fluff out these fibers, which is another thing I like about these long ass fingernails. So here we go. I'm just untwisting this a little bit. And I guess this came untwist locked or something. Another thing about cotton, because like I'm spinning 100% pure cotton here. There's no other fiber in this. When you are spinning pure cotton, you cannot spin thick and thin, you guys. You really can't spin thick and thin. If you spin thick and thin, your thin parts are going to get over twisted. Your thick parts are going to be under twisted. And because cotton is such a short staple fiber, and I mean short staple fiber, that makes a huge difference, and that yarn is going to fall apart. I have seen people make some beautiful art yarn with cotton, and if I see that they just did 100% cotton, I'm like, oh, bless your heart, that shit's going to fall apart. If I see that they've got bamboo silk and some other stuff going on in there, I'm like, okay, that will hold together. So if you're interested in doing cotton, thick and thin art yarn, you're going to need something else in this cotton. Preferably a longer staple fiber to keep that shit together. Make sure it's well blended. Here, I'm spinning a little bit differently. I'm trying to use both hands spinning and doing kind of more of an attenuated long draw. That's what this would be referred to as. Because this left hand is attenuating the draw and helping me out a little bit. Oh, my yarn is not actually giving me any give. So what I'm going to do, so this is completely twist locked, but I don't like it the way it is. So what do I need to do? I need to spin more. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to draft out a little bit longer of a make. And now when I pull, now it's giving me something. It's giving me a lot of fight, but it's giving me something. Alright, I like where this is at. I'm going to twist lock it. I'm going to put in a bunch of twists. And yes, I like that. So now we're going to go back here. There we go. And whenever I'm done spinning on a quill, I will usually just wrap this around. There's no reason not to just wrap your fiber supply around the quill. If I don't and it's just dangling, things snag on it, my cat gets to it, shit happens. So, that is how you use the quill attachment on the Cassandra. Now, compared to the charkha, how do I feel about it? Honestly, I'm not sure if I have a favorite or not. The Cassandra being new to me, it's a different experience, so it's a little more entertaining because I haven't done this on this mode. It's a little bit more entertaining. It's a little bit more of a challenge to me. But that said, I do think that my charkha up there on my shelf, I think it's more efficient. I do. That's not to say that I would never use the quill attachment on here. I think honestly, whenever I get back to spinning cotton, I might do some projects just on here and compare them to the projects on there. Now, the thing about the Cassandra is, and I'm sure if I went up or down my whirl ratios, I haven't tried that yet. I just wanted to show you guys the mechanics of spinning on it. I'm on the 12-to-1, and I am getting some pretty fine yarn on here. Now, on my charkha, when I change whirls, it actually does change the diameter of my yarn. When I make that initial draw from here to out here, it does change the diameter of the yarn. The 12-to-1 ratio on my charkha will be thicker than the 14-to-1 ratio yarn and the 16-to-1 ratio yarn every time. I'm also more familiar with that machine, and I trust that machine. I let that machine do some of that work for me and determine the size of the yarn for me. I'm sure if you did this on the Cassandra and you got good with it, you would see the same result. But I'm surprised at how thin I have been spinning this cotton sample here on a 12-to-1. When my charkha, to spin something this fine on my charkha, I'm usually on the 16-to-1 ratio. The 12-to-1 ratio makes a little bit thicker of a yarn. Not too thick though, because we're using cotton. Here's the thing about cotton and short staple fibers. You would be better off putting in more plies of a cotton single than to try to spin a thicker single. It doesn't work like that. Shorter staples need to be twisted tighter at a smaller diameter for them to twist lock properly. You cannot spin cotton as like a worsted single. I would not recommend going any higher than a DK weight single with cotton. And DK weight is kind of pushing it a little bit. But you definitely don't, if you try to spin a cotton single in a worsted weight of yarn, a thick worsted weight of yarn, it will eventually fall apart, or it will be so over twisted and gnarly, and then it will fall apart anyway. There's the mechanics of staple lengths at play here. Now, what you can spin thicker are your longer stapled fibers. You could spin BFL is very, very long stapled. You can make some beautiful bulky singles with BFL because of its long ass staple length, right? You can't, like, when you are designing a yarn and you're thinking about a yarn, you have a certain fiber. The same kind of goes for merino. You wouldn't really want to spin a bulky weight or a worsted weight single out of merino. But the thing about merino is it's wool. It's not going to fall apart. Wool fibers have scales that help them twist lock better. That's why wools don't need the same kind of twist that cotton does. Cotton needs a lot of twist to stay together because it's got very smooth fibers, right? But another thing about cotton is that cotton kind of wants to spin itself. As you can see with my little long draw going on, because it's such a short staple fiber, that twist runs through it real fast. Even if it's not twist locked, that twist will move real fast through those short staple fibers. So it is a pleasure to spin. It is relatively easy to spin. But working with a short staple plant fiber is very different from working with wool. And I will say again, when you spin thick and thin, and we're going to go back to twist moves like water, what does water do? Water takes the path of least resistance. So if you have a thick and thin yarn, you've got bumps, and then you've got little threads, and you've got bumps, and then you've got the little threads. What will happen is the twist will take the path of least resistance. It's not going to climb into that bump. It's going to stay and settle on the thread. So what happens? Your thread gets over twisted. Your bumps are under twisted. Your bumps can draft apart just like that. To make a really good thick and thin yarn, you don't want, and an intentional thick and thin yarn, you don't want your bumps to be longer than one staple length of fiber. Because you want the fibers that start off at the bump, the fibers that are twist locked at the start of the bump, to be the same fibers that are twist locked at the end of the bump, if that makes sense, right? So that bump doesn't come apart. It is very, very hard to do that with cotton because it has such a tiny staple length. How tiny is the staple length? Let me pull something out of here. Look at that. That staple length, you can't even see this on camera, I don't bet. This staple length is about an inch. It's barely an inch. Yeah, no, I think it's actually a little bit less than an inch because I've got a couple of hairs here. An inch or less with your cotton. So that would mean that my bump would have to be almost like a noil looking bump if I were to do an intentional thick and thin on 100% cotton. It would look more like a noil than an actual thick and thin bump. And as I said before, if you want to do thick and thin with cotton, make sure you have a longer stapled fiber in there. Maybe some nylon, maybe some bamboo silk. Before you buy fiber to do a project like that, check. And Paradise Fibers tells you how long the staple length is, like roughly, in their fibers. So make sure that your staple length is as long as you want your thick and thin bump to be. Now, goodness, that was a lot. I threw so much at you guys at the beginning of this podcast. I need to take a break in the middle of this podcast and think about what else I have on my docket for you guys so I don't forget. Okay guys, so the first segment ran a little long. I apologize if it got redundant, but I wanted to be very clear in what I was saying and talk about spinning cotton in general, as well as how to spin cotton on the Cassandra Quill. I kind of opened up a can of worms midway through that segment when I started talking about cotton in general, and I couldn't just leave you guys hanging with not expounding upon all of those things. So I'm going to run through this segment pretty quickly because I've got my finished project bin and they are overflowing because I finally washed, finished, and calculated the yardage on all of these. So this one, I haven't calculated the weight on this because it is very, very thick and thin. Eyeballing it, it looks like a worsted Aran. It definitely looks like a worsted Aran weight. This is 176 yards, and this is Peruvian wool. This is a very early dye job of mine and my first wheel spun yarn. So you'll recognize it from previous videos. These are the lace weights. And I want to show both ends of the cakes so that you guys can see the color changes going on. Beautiful, huh? These together are 746 yards of lace weight. It's really impressive. So they have their fingering, a few snippets, not their lace weight, and a few snippets of areas will slide into fingering very rarely. So I'm going to knit this as a lace weight, and where things get bulkier into a fingering weight, it'll just add texture. All of my Peruvians here, and you'll see that this cake is way bigger than the other cakes. This was from the bobbin that I overfilled to compensate for a bobbin that I felt like I underfilled. Anyway, these all together, this is 601 yards of DK weight. Now, this DK weight will slide into a worsted in some areas. I don't know how often it slides into a worsted, but different areas that I have checked, mainly from the outside of this, from the inside of this, and the outside and inside of the other cakes is where I take my samples when I'm doing a larger project. For the most part, they are DK weight, but I am going to be careful when I swatch and be aware that it will slide into a worsted. So if I knitted up a swatch and it's really, really tight in the areas that are DK weight and then it slides into worsted and they just puff real funny, I will go down a needle size until my DK weight is just a little bit looser so that when it slides into a worsted, it's not puffy, it's just a little bit more thicker. So those are the finished projects, all calculated out for you guys. I showed y'all this earlier whenever I was talking about adding the hooks to the flyer. This is the hawser ply. I'm going to do a project in depth on the hawser ply, and I don't want to get into how to do a hawser ply right now in this podcast because it's already run pretty long. So if you are interested in what a hawser ply is, why I've got all these bobbins, definitely check out the project in depth when it comes. I want it to come out this week sometime after this podcast is aired. So do keep an eye out for that if you're interested in what a hawser ply is and how to do it. Another current project that I have going on. Look how pretty this is. I'm getting Vaseline on me because my bobbin's got Vaseline on it. Look how pretty and sparkly that shit is. Ain't that nice? So this is because the hawser ply was done with 100% merino spun from top. These are spun from Rolags. This is a crepe project that I dyed and blended the Rolags for a crepe. So 1/3 of my yarn is gray, 2/3 of my yarn is pink with purple or lavender. It's more of a lavender. Firestar. These are alpaca Corriedale nylon blend, with the nylon being Firestar, which makes it super sparkly. The Rolags were just a little bit lackluster-ish, but once you start spinning with the Firestar, it pops. Like, it really, really pops. So this is going to be a crepe yarn. I'm going to do a project in depth on this as well, so that you guys can get the hang of it. And I'm also not going to go into detail on how to do a crepe yarn right now. I've mentioned it in other previous podcasts, so that's what I have planned. That's what's coming up. You will see more project in depths on actual spinning, whereas before I did a project in depth on dyeing, and then I did a project in depth on blending and how I do a more cohesive, well-blended blend on a blending board. And that's exactly how I blended these Rolags here. So if you want to know how I did these Rolags, just refer back to a project in depth I did. They were turquoise colored, so look for that thumbnail with some turquoise colored fiber in it. And that is it. That is it. You guys have 2 project in depths planned to look forward to. And next week, I am going to talk about, in the podcast, I'm going to talk about the baby stuff that I've done, because I bought buttons. I'm finishing them this week. I'm going to put all the touches on them and show them off next week for you guys. And then spinner control cards. I want to show you guys how to do spinner control cards that suit you. So I'm going to show you my spinner control cards, why I put things where I did, what I decided to put on here, what I didn't decide to put on here, and because I ended up putting everything on here. So you're going to be doing more subtracting than adding for your own control cards, depending on how controlling you want your control cards to be, and just my process of how I fill this out, when I fill it out, and whatnot. So that's going to be all next week. So please stay tuned for that. I hope to see you soon. And in the meantime, happy crafting and bye-bye.